Okay, this is going to be a wild ride. Get comfortable, because you're about to witness a story that starts with a sneer and ends with an empire crumbling. Before we dive in, if you love stories where the underdog rises and the truth shatters illusions, make sure you hit that follow button and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your engagement fuels our passion for bringing these incredible narratives to light. Now let the sparks fly. The engine room, deep within the gleaming chrome and glass fortress of Apex Innovations, hummed with a toxic brew of anxiety and thinly veiled amusement. Apex, a titan in the bleeding-edge aerospace industry, headquartered in the sprawling tech hub of Seattle, was hosting what felt less like an internal review and more like a public execution. The air, usually thick with the scent of ozone and ambition, now carried an additional acrid note of corporate schadenfreude. Engineers in impeccably tailored dark suits, their faces usually set in expressions of focused intensity, now exchanged furtive, smirking glances. At the heart of this uncomfortable tableau sat the behemoth, the Phoenix X-12, a revolutionary ion propulsion drive. This wasn't just an engine. It was a multi-billion-dollar gamble, the flagship project meant to redefine interstellar travel, a testament to Apex dominance. But for 3 agonizing weeks, the Phoenix X-12 had been nothing but a very expensive, very silent paperweight. Diagnostics were a labyrinth of dead ends. The brightest minds in the company, men and women who could calculate thrust vectors in their sleep, were utterly humiliatingly stumped. Donovan Thorne, Apex CEO, a man whose silver-streaked dark hair was as sharp as his bespoke suits and whose voice could make granite tremble, paced before the inert machine. His arms were folded, a vein throbbing at his temple, his gaze sweeping over his highly paid, highly educated, and currently highly useless research division. Disappointment radiated from him like a cold front. His eyes, like a hawk spotting an unsuspecting field mouse, landed on Marcus Vance. Marcus, a quiet man in his late 40s, was diligently, almost invisibly, mopping a distant corner of the vast room, trying to melt into the polished concrete floor. He flinched, looking down, a familiar gesture of a man long accustomed to existing in the peripheries. Thorne's lips curled into a predatory smile. This was an opportunity too delicious to pass up. "Perhaps," Thorne boomed, his voice dripping with sarcasm that echoed off the high ceilings. "We've been approaching this with too much education." He gestured dramatically towards the room's main entrance. Standing there, a worn messenger bag slung over her shoulder, was a young woman no older than 17. This was Elara Vance, Marcus's daughter, here to meet her father after her advanced placement physics class. Her bag, heavy with textbooks, schematics for personal projects, and a battered notebook filled with intricate equations held together by duct tape, seemed to weigh her down. Elara blinked, her intelligent hazel eyes wide with surprise, unsure if the imperious man was addressing her. Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Come now, young lady. You look like you know a thing or two about, well, something. What do you say? If you can breathe life into this multi-billion-dollar headache, I might just be persuaded to fund your entire university education. A full scholarship, perhaps." A wave of sycophantic laughter rolled through the assembled engineers. They preened, relieved the CEO's ire was momentarily diverted. Elara, however, didn't laugh. Her gaze flickered to her father. Marcus, his face ashen, gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was a warning, a plea. But something in Thorne's dismissive tone, in the condescending amusement of the engineers, ignited a spark in Elara. She straightened her shoulders, a quiet dignity settling over her youthful features. She stepped forward, her worn sneakers surprisingly silent on the gleaming floor. Her voice, though soft, carried a tremor not of fear, but of something else, a tightly coiled intensity. "May I examine it?" Thorne, clearly relishing the spectacle, spread his hands wide. "Be my guest, little genius. The floor is yours." Smartphones materialized as if by magic. Several engineers, their earlier smirks now tinged with a cruel anticipation, began recording. Oh, this would be gold for the after-work gossip circuit. The janitor's kid making a fool of herself. But as Elara approached the colossal engine, a palpable shift occurred. The slight tremor in her hands vanished. She dropped her messenger bag. It landed with a soft, unceremonious thud. From it, she retrieved her battered notebook. Flipping to a specific page, a dense tapestry of diagrams and handwritten annotations so complex it made several senior engineers involuntarily lean closer, a confused frown creasing their brows. "Where did she get that?" one whispered, his voice tight with disbelief. That looks disturbingly similar to the early alpha schematics we abandoned 6 months ago," another murmured, a chill crawling up his spine. Elara paid them no mind. For a full 60 seconds, she simply looked, her eyes tracing invisible lines, her mind seemingly light years ahead of everyone in the room. Then, with a grace that belied her age, she set to work. Her fingers, long and nimble, danced across the engine's surface with an almost unnerving familiarity. She didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess. She unlatched a secondary coolant conduit casing, deftly removed a small access panel that most had overlooked, her fingers probing deep within the intricate control housing. Her eyes narrowed on a tiny, almost microscopic phase-shift capacitor, buried like a forgotten secret. With a delicate precision, she disconnected it and, to the utter astonishment of the onlookers, produced a near-identical, yet subtly different component from a small pouch within her own bag. "She carries components?" someone stammered, the words catching in their throat. "That's no ordinary teenager," another added, his eyes narrowing, the earlier amusement replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable respect. Elara secured the new capacitor, reattached the panel, and sealed the casing. She stepped back, wiping a smudge of synthetic lubricant from her cheek with the back of her hand. "Try it now," she said, her voice still quiet, but now imbued with an undeniable authority. The lead technician, a portly man named Henderson, who still wore a faint, disbelieving smirk, sauntered to the main console. He jabbed the ignition sequence button, a gesture more of indulgence than expectation. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a low hum, a flicker of lights, a surge of power. The Phoenix X-12 roared to life, not with a cough or a sputter, but with a smooth, powerful, perfectly modulated thrum that resonated through the very bones of the building. It was flawless. The room plunged into a silence so profound it was almost deafening. Thorne's face, usually a mask of controlled arrogance, had bleached to a sickly, chalky white. But no one was looking at him. All eyes were on Elara. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from teenage nerves. It was the tremor of a dam about to break, the secret she had guarded for so long, a truth interwoven with her very DNA surging to the surface. There would be no containing it now. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the purr of Apex Innovation's most advanced and previously most recalcitrant power unit. The flawless hum was an accusation, a testament to weeks of collective failure, now rectified in under 5 minutes by a 17-year-old girl. Elara stepped further back, wiping grease from her fingers onto the sleeve of her worn hoodie. She had just unlocked more than an engine. She had unlocked a past that would rewrite the company's entire history. Donovan Thorne stared at the glowing console of the now purring Phoenix X-12, his jaw clenched so hard the muscles in his temples bulged. He didn't look at Elara, not yet. He was scrambling, his mind racing to process the impossible. The girl, the janitor's daughter he'd used for a cheap laugh, had just performed a miracle. His multi-million-dollar R&D department couldn't. A tentative, hesitant clap started from the back of the room. It was from a junior technician, a young man with wide, almost tear-filled eyes. Another joined, then another. But it wasn't the applause of triumph. It was a strange, unnerving symphony of awe, bewilderment, and a creeping, unnameable fear. Thorne raised a hand, sharp and dismissive, silencing the scattered applause. His voice, when he finally spoke, was strained, laced with a caution that was entirely new. Who are you?" Elara didn't answer immediately. Her gaze found her father. Marcus Vance stood frozen, mop clutched in his hand like a lifeline, his eyes wide with a terror that was heartbreakingly familiar to her, and something else, a deep, old pain. She turned back to Thorne, her young face composed. "I'm just someone who understands engines." A few of the senior engineers, their professional pride pricked, surged forward. One of them, a sharp-featured woman named Dr. Lena Hansen, head of propulsion theory, pointed at Elara's open notebook. "Those schematics, that specific harmonic dampener design, how did you come by that?" It was a classified internal model. Elara hesitated, then her voice dropped, almost to a whisper. "I drew it." A burst of uneasy laughter erupted, this time laced with desperation. "You expect us to believe," a man with a neatly trimmed beard scoffed, "that you, a high school student, independently reverse-engineered a prototype that cost this company $4 billion to develop." "I didn't reverse-engineer it," Elara stated, her voice gaining strength. She opened her notebook again, flipping to another page, even more densely packed with calculations and design iterations. "I designed it. This one," she tapped the page, "is an improvement. Your engine, it copied mine." A collective gasp, sharp and incredulous, sucked the air from the room. Thorne's face flushed a dangerous, mottled crimson. He snatched the notebook from her grasp, his fingers surprisingly clumsy. He flipped through the pages. Complex equations, advanced electrical schematics, fluid dynamics models, stress test simulations. Page after page of breathtakingly original engineering work, annotated in meticulous, elegant handwriting in blue ink, with dates meticulously recorded, stretching back nearly 4 years. "You designed this engine?" "When you were 13? Thorne asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I never said I designed that specific engine," Elara corrected, her gaze unwavering. "I said I designed my engine. Yours," she gestured to the Phoenix X-12, "is an unauthorized and, frankly, inferior derivative." Marcus Vance finally moved, stepping forward, placing a trembling hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Elara, we should go," he whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. "No!" Thorne snapped, his eyes glinting with a mixture of fury and a dawning, terrifying realization. "You're not going anywhere." Elara met his gaze unflinching. "Are you detaining us, Mr. Thorne?" Thorne recoiled slightly, the legal implications of her question momentarily piercing his outrage. His ego warred with a sudden primal instinct for damage control. "Of course not, but we need to discuss this." Marcus's voice, though still trembling, found a new resolve. "No, Donovan, you don't need to talk. For once in your life, you need to listen." Thorne froze. The use of his first name, the shift in Marcus's demeanor from subservient to something else entirely, was jarring. "Years ago," Marcus began, his voice resonating with a sorrow that had been suppressed for too long, "there was a woman who worked here, a visionary, a genius. She was my wife, Elara's mother." His eyes found Thorne's. "Her name was Dr. Evelyn Reed." Thorne's eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. A name buried deep in the company's archives, a name deliberately forgotten. She designed the foundational architecture for this propulsion system, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength with every word. Long before your team ever claimed credit, and when she discovered they were systematically stealing her intellectual property, cannibalizing her research, she threatened to expose them. His voice cracked. The following week, she vanished. A tragic lab accident, they called it. Contained. Classified. His gaze was like iron. I never believed that story. I took the only thing I had left of her, our daughter, and I ran. I hid. The hum of the Phoenix X-12 was the only sound, a relentless pulse in the dead silence that followed. A dropped pin would have echoed like a cannon shot. Every breath was held, every heartbeat a drum against ribs. Elara stood beside her father, her hands clenched into fists, her young face a mask of stoic grief. Inside, a tempest of anger, fear, and a sorrow so profound it had been a part of her for as long as she could remember, finally breached the surface. Donovan Thorne stared, truly stared, as if he'd seen a phantom from a past he'd tried to entomb. The name Dr. Evelyn Reed hadn't been uttered within Apex Innovations' walls with any significance for nearly 15 years. Not because she was forgotten by those who knew, but because they had been ordered to forget. The official narrative was sealed, the files locked away, the accident a closed chapter, her body never recovered. What haunted Thorne, what sent an icy dread coiling in his gut, wasn't just that Evelyn Reed had worked at Apex. It was the unspoken buried knowledge that she had been brilliant, too brilliant, a threat. Dr. Hansen, the propulsion theorist, stepped closer to Elara, her professional skepticism replaced by a horrified awe. You're her daughter? Elara nodded once, a single sharp affirmation. From the back, another voice, older, cracked with emotion, whispered, I remember Evelyn. She ran one of my first advanced training seminars. She could visualize entire propulsion dynamics in her head, sketch them out like she was composing a symphony. Thorne's grip on Elara's notebook tightened until his knuckles were white. His voice, when it returned, was raw, edged with disbelief and something far more venomous, the bitterness of exposure. Why come back? Why now? Why orchestrate this circus? Elara stepped forward, away from her father's protective hand. I never planned any of this. I didn't even want to be in this room. You made it a spectacle. You issued a challenge, a joke at my expense, asking me to fix what your best and brightest couldn't. So, I did. Her gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of the stunned engineers. But now that I am here, now that the truth is out, I will not walk away from it again. Marcus reached for her shoulder, but she gently moved his hand aside. You see, Elara continued, her voice resonating with a wisdom far beyond her years, I used to believe that silence protected people, that by staying hidden, we were safe. But silence is what allowed them to steal her work. Silence is what allowed them to erase her. Silence is what let her die. And if there is even one person in this room who remembers my mother, who ever wondered what truly happened to Dr. Evelyn Reed, then they deserve to hear it. A senior engineer, a man named Arthur Jenkins, his hair grayed, his face etched with lines of guilt, slowly, hesitantly raised a hand. I was here. When it happened, I saw them pull her research access. I saw her project files rerouted, her name stripped from patents. I never spoke up. We were all afraid. And you weren't the only one who knew something was wrong, Marcus interjected, his voice sharp, cutting through the stunned silence. I cleaned those labs. I heard the hushed, fearful whispers. I saw the suddenly locked-off sectors, the engineers who would go pale if her name was even accidentally mentioned. They buried her, Thorne. They buried her memory. But they didn't bury her mind. They didn't bury her brilliance. And they damn sure didn't bury her bloodline. He gestured towards Elara, whose quiet strength seemed to fill the vast room. Thorne's face contorted, the carefully constructed facade of control cracking, then shattering. "Do you honestly think this changes anything?" he snarled, a desperate, cornered animal. "A forgotten name? A few childish blueprints. Do you think that makes you someone important?" Elara offered a small, sad smile. It wasn't the smile of a teenager seeking validation. It was the serene, knowing smile of someone who understood a fundamental truth he had long forgotten. "You know what makes someone important, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. "The truth. And right now, every single person in this room, including you, knows it." The silence that descended this time was different. It wasn't stunned or awkward. It was the charged electric silence of an awakening. Suddenly, Dr. Lena Hansen, with a decisive movement, unclipped her Apex Innovations security badge and let it clatter onto the polished floor. Arthur Jenkins, his face a mixture of shame and a dawning relief, did the same. Then another engineer, and another. A small pile of discarded allegiances began to form. Thorne's eyes darted around the room, his power, his authority, evaporating before his very eyes. "This is still my company," he blustered, but the words lacked conviction. "It was never truly yours to begin with, Donovan," Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm. "It was built on stolen genius." Thorne let out a harsh, bitter laugh, but it sounded hollow, defeated. "You think anyone will believe this melodrama? You think any of this will stick? You have no proof beyond a teenager's notebook and a janitor's grief." Elara calmly reached into her messenger bag again. This time she pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen. A video began to play, crystal clear audio capturing every word from the moment Thorne had first mockingly pointed her out, his challenge, the engineer's laughter, her quiet acceptance, the miraculous repair, and his subsequent interrogation. The entire damning exchange. She held it up. "Audio, video. Your own words, Mr. Thorne." Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it resonated like a thunderclap. "It already has." Before the sun even dared to paint the Seattle skyline with its dawn hues the next morning, the clip had detonated across the internet. It began as a flicker on an obscure aerospace enthusiasts forum. Then, fed by a potent cocktail of outrage and awe, it erupted. A digital wildfire, it blazed across social media platforms, news aggregators, and internal company message boards like a rogue wave tearing through a complacent harbor. Elara Vance's face, a compelling storm of youthful vulnerability and steely resolve, and her voice calm and unwavering as she spoke of truth and her mother's stolen legacy, became an overnight sensation. People replayed the moment she'd uttered, "I designed it." They replayed Thorne's sputtering disbelief. They replayed the cascade of falling badges. They listened, rapt, as the story of Dr. Evelyn Reed, a ghost in the machine, was resurrected. By midday, Apex Innovations and Evelyn Reed were trending globally, not for a breakthrough in ion propulsion, but for a corporate conspiracy of staggering audacity and a cover-up that had held for 15 years. The world, it seemed, was suddenly desperate to know everything about the brilliant scientist who had been erased and the quiet janitor and his prodigious daughter who had brought her back into the light. A decentralized army of online sleuths, citizen journalists, and disgruntled former Apex employees began to dig. Archival footage, half-redacted internal memos, suspicious patent reassignments bearing Reed's ghost-like initials, and project timelines that abruptly, inexplicably, went dark around the time of her accident began to surface. And at the epicenter of this digital earthquake stood Elara Vance, no longer just a shy teenager with a penchant for physics, no longer merely Marcus Vance's quiet daughter. She had become the storm. Inside Apex Innovations headquarters, the gleaming edifice now felt like a tomb. Chaos churned, a well-oiled machine grinding itself to pieces. Donovan Thorne had barricaded himself in his penthouse office suite, a glass-walled cage overlooking the city, flanked by a frantic squadron of lawyers and PR crisis managers. They implored him, begged him, to issue a statement, a carefully worded apology, any acknowledgement. Oh, but Thorne, his pride a malignant poison he had imbibed for decades, refused. He snarled, he threatened, he blustered, but the walls were closing in. In the sprawling atrium-like lobby below, employees gathered in stunned whispering clusters around giant display screens broadcasting the unfolding drama. Some watched with a dawning horror, others with a grim satisfaction, a few with the heavy weight of complicity. Arthur Jenkins stood quietly at the edge of a crowd, his now useless ID badge clutched in his hand. Dr. Lena Hansen, her face set with a grim determination, was on her laptop, methodically uploading encrypted internal files, research notes, email chains, project budget diversions, to a secure server accessible by investigative journalists. Every leaked document was another nail in Apex coffin. Elara and Marcus sat side by side in the utilitarian starkness of an old, rarely used employee break room on a lower floor. The air smelled of stale coffee and fear. For a long while, neither spoke. The only sounds the low hum of a drinks vending machine and the distant, muffled cacophony of news anchors dissecting their lives as if they were characters in a blockbuster thriller. I never imagined it would come to this, Marcus finally breathed, his voice thick with unshed tears. I just wanted to protect you. Elara reached out and took his hand. I didn't think it would either, Dad. I just wanted to fix an engine. A small, wry smile touched her lips. But you know what I realized, standing in that room, with all those eyes on me? Marcus looked at her, his own eyes filled with a fierce, protective love. I was never just Mom's daughter, Elara said, her voice soft but firm. I was her legacy. I am her voice. And someone, finally, had to speak for her. He nodded slowly, a wave of emotion, grief, pride, relief, washing over him. Suddenly, a series of sharp, authoritative knocks echoed down the corridor. They were firm, unhesitating, almost ceremonial. A group of individuals in dark, unassuming suits, badges glinting, federal agents, stepped into the main atrium. They didn't address the stunned staff. Their expressions were impassive, their purpose clear. They moved directly, inexorably, towards the executive elevators. No one dared to stop them. The entire company seemed to hold its breath as the elevator doors whispered shut, carrying them upwards towards Thorne. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened again. Donovan Thorne emerged, not with his usual arrogant stride, but flanked by two agents, his wrists bound by gleaming steel handcuffs. The moment his ashen, defeated face appeared on the lobby screens, a spontaneous sound erupted. Not quite a cheer, more a collective gasp of disbelief and catharsis. Some employees clapped, a few openly wept, but most simply stood in stunned, silent awe. The man who had ruled for years through intimidation and silence had finally, irrevocably, been silenced by the truth. Outside, a barrage of camera flashes turned the afternoon into a chaotic, artificial noon as Thorne was escorted, head bowed, into an unmarked black SUV. Journalists shouted questions, a maelstrom of voices desperate for a soundbite. Elara didn't speak to them, not then. She stood on the top step of Apex Innovations, Marcus at her side, watching the vehicle disappear through the main gates, carrying away the man who had believed he owned everything, including the truth. "You should say something, Elara," Marcus whispered, his hand on her arm. "They're all waiting. For you." Elara took a deep breath, the scent of city air, exhaust fumes, and the faintest trace of her mother's stolen dreams filling her lungs. She stepped forward towards the microphones. "My mother, Dr. Evelyn Reed," she began, her voice clear, carrying over the din, "gave her life to build something beautiful, something that could change the world for the better." Her gaze swept over the crowd. "Others tried to steal it, to bury her work, to erase her name. But truth has a way of rising. It cannot stay buried forever. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes—" a faint, sad smile touched her lips. "It takes her daughter." And in that moment, it wasn't about revenge or even vindication. It was about something far more elemental, far more powerful. It was about justice finally taking flight. The world, for Elara Vance, seemed to have tilted on its axis. Standing outside the now infamous Apex Innovations building, the late afternoon sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the courtyard, where a dwindling crowd of employees and persistent reporters still lingered. Yet, amidst the residual chaos, an almost sacred stillness enveloped her. It was the silence that follows the breaking of a great storm, not empty, but pregnant with awe and the scent of rain-washed earth. Inside her, however, a different kind of energy brewed, no longer a tempest, but a steady, flowing current. A sleek, black limousine, its windows tinted to an obsidian opacity, glided to the curb. The crowd instinctively parted, a murmur rippling through them. No one recognized the vehicle, but its silent, understated authority commanded respect. A uniformed driver emerged, his movements precise, and opened the rear passenger door. Out stepped a woman. She was elderly, but her posture was ramrod straight, her silver hair coiffed with an old-world elegance. She wore a tailored coat of deep emerald green that seemed to shimmer subtly in the fading light. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the remaining faces, then landed on Elara, and softened. It was Eleanor Reed, Evelyn's mother, Elara's grandmother, the matriarch who had borne the silent, unyielding grief of a stolen daughter and a justice she had long despaired of ever witnessing. "Elara," she said. Her voice, though cultured, trembled with decades of suppressed emotion. Elara turned. For a breathtaking moment, the world, the reporters, the crumbling empire of Apex Innovations all fell away. They had never met in person. Only faded photographs, half-remembered anecdotes shared by Marcus, letters exchanged across a chasm of years and sorrow. But in that instant, blood knew blood. Legacy recognized legacy. "Grandmother," Elara breathed, the word feeling both strange and profoundly right on her tongue. Eleanor Reed closed the distance between them, her gloved hand reaching out. "I kept everything, child," she whispered, tears finally tracing paths down her distinguished face. "Every article about your mother's early work, every research note she ever sent me, every photograph. I was waiting for this day, even when I told myself it would never come." Elara took her grandmother's hand, feeling the frailness of age and the unyielding strength of a spirit that had refused to break. A current of shared history, of shared loss, and now shared triumph flowed between them. For the first time in her young life, Elara didn't feel like she was standing against the world. She was standing with generations of resilience behind her. As they stood there, a man in a crisp, unassuming suit, his demeanor more academic than corporate, stepped forward from the periphery. He introduced himself quietly as Agent Kendrick, acting head of the newly formed Department of Scientific Integrity and Ethics, a division fast-tracked into existence in the immediate, explosive wake of the Apex scandal. He offered Elara a simple manila folder. "What is this?" Elara asked, her brow furrowed. "Justice," Agent Kendrick replied, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "And an opportunity." Inside the folder was a formal letter bearing the seal of a Congressional Oversight Committee, signed by multiple influential senators. It outlined a new federal initiative, the Reed Program, a multi-agency project dedicated to funding, supporting, and legally protecting young, underrepresented inventors and researchers, particularly those from marginalized communities, ensuring their intellectual property was sacrosanct. It detailed plans for the immediate establishment of a national research incubator, a haven for innovation, free from corporate predation. The first chairperson of its advisory board, Elara Vance. Tears welled in Elara's eyes, blurring the official script. Not tears of sorrow this time, nor even solely of joy. They were tears of profound, overwhelming validation. Her mother's work, her mother's sacrifice, would not vanish into the greedy maw of corporate theft. It would not be a footnote in a scandalous history. It would rise. It would inspire. It would build. That evening, far from the glare of news cameras and the imposing structures of industry, Elara Vance stood on a small, simple stage in a local community center. It was a modest hall, filled not with engineers or executives, but with children from the neighborhood, their faces bright with curiosity, their parents looking on with a mixture of awe and hope. She lifted her violin, the polished wood gleaming under the soft stage lights. A hush fell over the small audience. Then, the first note. It was soft, achingly fragile, a single thread of sound in the quiet room. But within seconds it swelled, gaining richness, complexity, and a soaring, undeniable power. The music filled every corner, weaving a tapestry of sound that was more than just melody and harmony. It was memory. It was resilience. It was the echo of her mother's stolen genius, the fierce protectiveness of her father, the long years of silent struggle, and the triumphant, shattering arrival of truth. It was every injustice, every small act of defiance, every buried hope, every tear shed in darkness, and every victory, hard-won and luminous. When the final note faded into a resonant silence, no one clapped, not immediately. They simply sat, breathless, their hearts full, transformed by the raw, eloquent honesty of the music and the young woman who had played it. Outside, high above the glittering Seattle skyline, a newly erected digital billboard flickered to life. It displayed not an advertisement for a new gadget or a corporate slogan, but a single, powerful image, a sepia-toned photograph of Dr. Evelyn Reed, her eyes bright with fierce intelligence, standing proudly beside a schematic. And beside it, a contemporary image of Elara Vance, violin in hand, her gaze clear and looking towards the future. Beneath them, a simple line of text, "Truth rises." And as Elara stepped off the stage, the quiet applause finally beginning, she knew her journey was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. The world had listened. And now it was ready to build something new, something better, on the foundations of a truth that had, at long last, found its voice. And there you have it, the incredible journey of Elara Vance, from a scorned teenager to a symbol of truth and resilience. What a powerful story of courage against overwhelming odds. What part of Elara's fight resonated most with you? Have you ever witnessed a moment where the truth shattered a carefully constructed facade? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of justice and the unbreakable human spirit, and you want to see more narratives that empower and inspire, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us bring more incredible stories like this to light. Thanks for watching.